All right, so welcome everybody to Parsha Unpacked. I'm going to mute everybody, and of course, feel free to unmute yourselves as you so choose. Today, we're going to work a little bit on Parsha's Nitzavim, which is very, very much connected to the theme of Rosh Hashanah, and of course, considering that Rosh Hashanah is in a little bit more than a week, we'll try to highlight the connection between the Parsha and Rosh Hashanah, and also focusing on the fact that this week, this Shabbos is the final Shabbos of the year. So this is the last Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Is that right? Rosh Hashanah is in a week from tomorrow or whatever, Tuesday. So yeah, so this will be the last Shabbos of the year, which means it's a very special Shabbos because, as we know from our great sources of Kabbalah and Hasidus, the last Shabbos of the year is an opportunity to fix all of the Shabboses for the rest of the year. So if you're like me, and there are some things that we need to fix regarding our Shabboses for the previous year, this is an opportunity to do, because everything goes after the end, and the end here is the final Shabbos of the year. So it's an awesome opportunity. But I want to focus on the Parsha a little bit, and I want to open right away to the beginning of the Parsha. The Parsha is Nitzavim, and it starts with chapter 29, verse 9 in Deuteronomy. In the Stone Chumash, that is page 1087. And I'll read to you here the first few verses. This is Moshe. Moshe speaking in the final days of his life, right before he passes on, leaves this world, and hands over the leadership of the Jewish people to his disciple Joshua. He gathers the Jewish people together in a national assembly, and he says to them, "You are standing today, all of you, before Hashem your God, the heads of your tribes, your elders, and your officers, all the men of Israel, your small children, your wives, your proselyte, who's in the midst of your camp, from the hewer of the wood to the drawer of your water." For why is everybody gathered here? Moshe says, for you to pass into the covenant of your God and into his imprecation that Hashem your God seals with you today. That's a bris, a covenant. We'll talk about that in a minute. In order to establish you today as a people to him, and that he be a God to you, as he spoke to you and as he swore to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the renewal, once again, of the covenant, a further validation and a further unification of God and the Jewish people through the covenant, the final time that Moshe is going to recount the covenant that exists between God and the Jewish people. And we know a covenant is a two-way street. A covenant is a commitment on both ends. We make a commitment to be God's people and to live up to our end of our responsibility, which is to serve God, to follow his Torah, and to keep his commandments. And by doing so, he commits to being a special God to us and having a special relationship to us, as he swore to our forefathers. And this covenant binds us to this very day. You and I are bound by this covenant. And that's the first question that I want to address, which is why? I don't know about you, but I wasn't there, and if my parents, you were, okay, well, we really were, but hold on. If my parents make a commitment, my grandparents or my great-grandparents make a commitment to somebody, that some agreement, some contract that they have between my great-grandparents and some other partner, business contract, that doesn't obligate me, that doesn't bind me in that contract. So how can it be that you and I, 3,300 years later, are still bound or are considered to be bound by this contract? Well, in order to get the answer to that, we have to read on two more verses. Not with you alone do I seal this covenant and imprecation. I guess that means like another word for covenant, a bris or an oath. But with whoever is here standing with us today, our God, before Hashem, our God, and with whoever is not here with us today. Meaning this covenant was not just for the Jewish people that were present at the moment, but it was incumbent upon future generations. But I'll still ask the question, how is that possible? No one asked me. I wasn't there. And the answer to that question is, as the man said, yes, I was. Because as we know from the Medrash says, the Medrash Tanchuma says, Lafishit haneshamos hayu sham, v'dayin guf lo nivra. Just because we were not there physically, our bodies were not yet our bodies didn't exist yet, but our neshamos were there. All the neshamos of Klal Yisrael were present. Just like we say that by Har Sinai, the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai, all the neshamas of the Jewish people were present. So too by this covenant, by this bris, the Jewish people and God made the covenant, and the Jewish neshamas, all the Jewish souls were there. So we were there. We were there, and there's no two ways about it. I'm just making sure that no one's having a hard time getting in. A little bit strange, but okay. Oh, there's Jeff Cantor. Hey guys, listen, it's Jeff Cantor's birthday. Let's unmute everybody. And when he jumps on, let's all say surprise and say happy birthday. Okay, you have to unmute yourself, I think. Okay, ready? Here he comes. Hold on. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Surprise!
Surprise! Birthday, Jeffrey!
Happy birthday.
Jeffrey.
Happy birthday.
Okay, are you there, Jeffrey? We're all wishing you a happy birthday. Okay. Maybe he's not there. Okay, anyway, back to the Medrash. The Medrash says that we were all there, all of our neshamas were there, and that's why we're all obligated in this particular oath. Now, I want to say something very helpful over here. The Zohar helps us decode these verses a little bit with one little secret, which is that the Zohar says that when the Torah uses the word hayom, which means today, it's code for Rosh Hashanah. So the Zohar says. Now, you'd have to go through and see every time that the Torah uses this word hayom, today, and see how that works out and how that holds up. But here, it makes a lot of sense. Atem Nitzavim hayom, you are standing here today. Today refers to Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because on Rosh Hashanah, we are all standing here. We're all standing before God. And there is a lot that can be learned about Rosh Hashanah from these particular verses. But the first thing that I want to say is the next word. Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem. You are standing here today, kulchem, all of you, kulchem, together, all together, united as one. And that's probably, I would say, in my opinion, the most important thing that we need to know going into Rosh Hashanah. And this, by the way, is a tremendous piece of advice and a very good thing to keep in mind, that on Rosh Hashanah, the best thing we could possibly do, and I'll explain this, when we're standing in judgment before Hashem, is to be able to demonstrate to Hashem and to ourselves that we are a critical, indispensable part of kulchem, of the entirety of the Jewish people. That the Jewish people cannot make it without me. Okay? And why is that so important? Because all of the promises that were given about the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that will achieve atonement, and that redemption is near. All of these promises that are made about atonement and redemption, those promises are not made to you and I as individual Jews. Those promises are made to Am Yisrael, to the nation, to the conglomerate, to the nation as a whole. And therefore, as long as we are individuals and not part of Am Yisrael, we don't get to benefit from any of those promises of kapara, of atonement, of cleansing, of redemption. But if we are part of Am Yisrael and we can find a way to humbly nullify ourselves to Am Yisrael and be a critical part of Am Yisrael, then we are included in all of those promises of goodness and blessing and redemption and kapara and atonement. So that's something very important to keep in mind. That's what I was telling myself last night at 2 a.m. when Slichos were over and I was with Eliezer and he goes, "Let's go home, Abba." And I said, "Go home and leave everybody else to clean up all the chairs and put away all the mechitzas into, we can't do that. We benefited from this beautiful Slichos. We have to stay and be a part of cleaning it up, right? That's kulchem. We all have to realize that we are all critical, not just, individuals, but we're a critical part of of the Jewish people. Now, something to keep in mind regarding Rosh Hashanah, and this is a question that is particularly relevant this year to me, and that is because in America, all of the holidays, or I say not only in America, anywhere outside the land of Israel, all the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Pesach, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, Shavuos, they're all 2 days, right? You keep 2 days of Yantif. But in Israel, you only keep 1 day of Yantif. Pesach is 1 day in the beginning and 1 day at the end, instead of 2 in the beginning and 2 at the end. 1 Seder. Sukkot is 1 day in the beginning, 1 day in the end. The only exception is Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days, even in Israel, no matter where you are. Wait, it's going to turn that air on. Sorry. After I drink my coffee, I get hot. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days, even in Eretz Israel. And there's a technical reason for that, which I'll mention, but I'm not going to explain now because it's boring for most people. And that is because since most of the holidays are in the middle of the month, there was enough time to signal when Rosh Chodesh was, when the month began, and when the holiday was for the people living in the land of Israel, because that's where the Sanhedrin sat, and that's where the new month was declared. But Rosh Hashanah is not in the middle of the month. Rosh Hashanah is on Rosh Chodesh, it's on the first of the month. So even there was not enough time, even in Israel, to inform everybody when it was, and therefore it wasn't clear what day it was, and therefore they kept 2 days just to be safe. Fine, that's the technical reason. But there's a deeper spiritual reason. I want to share with you a Mishnah. I'm going to put it up on my screen. Okay. And the Mishnah says like this. So the Mishnah teaches, this is a Mishnah in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, and it says as follows. The Mishnah teaches that there are 4 times during the year when different aspects of the natural world are judged. For example, on Pesach, harvests are judged. Right? How much crops are going to be produced in our fields for the year? On Atzeres, which is Shavuos, fruits are judged. How much fruits the trees are going to produce. And lastly, on Sukkot, water is judged. How much rain there's going to be, how much water. Okay. And then it says humanity is judged on Rosh Hashanah. Humanity, meaning mankind, human beings are judged on Rosh Hashanah. By the way, it doesn't say here Jewish people. It says humanity, meaning the whole world. Then the Mishnah says, all who are on earth, not the Jewish people, all of mankind, pass before him, before God, one by one, like B'nai Maron. B'nai Maron. Now, the term B'nai Maron is a little bit ambiguous, and the Talmud, the Gemara, goes on to explain what exactly that means. And it uses 3 different ways to explain what this phrase means. The whole world passes before God like B'nai Maron. So firstly, the first explanation is like young sheep. B'nai Maron means young sheep, meaning that just like a shepherd counts each one of his sheep individually, they pass before him one by one, so too we pass before God on Rosh Hashanah one by one. Secondly, the second explanation is like the stairs in the house of Maron, meaning there was a narrow staircase that allows only one person to climb at a time. Okay, that's the second explanation. And the third explanation is like soldiers of King David who were counted one by one before going into battle. Okay, so basically those are the first three ways of understanding it. There are like three different ways of saying the same idea, and we'll come back to that in a little bit, why the Talmud needed to give three ways of explaining this idea. But the idea is basically that we're judged one by one, individually. Okay, and then the Mishnah goes on and says, the Gemara goes on and says that Rabba Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, no, that's not true. They're not judged individually one by one, but they're all surveyed with one survey, meaning everybody is judged in one big view, in one person, in one moment. We're all judged together. So this seems to be an argument in the Talmud, and the more modern contemporary rabbis wonder what's the real essence of what's going on here. Now, Rabbi Dessler, who we're all familiar with, Rabbi Dessler from previous discussions and classes, Rabbi Dessler says, in a typical Talmudic way, he says, they're both true, meaning it's true that we're judged individually, and it's true that we're judged collectively. And he says, quoting from the Zohar, that main primary source of Kabbalistic teachings, he says that there are two types of judgment on Rosh Hashanah. There's something called din kashya, strong judgment, like dark roast. It's strong, it's really strong. And then there's something called din rafia, which means a light judgment, a blonde roast, a light roast. Two types of judgment that take place on Rosh Hashanah. Din kasha, the very severe, strict, strong judgment, and din rafia, the lighter, weaker, less severe judgment. The Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who was the author of the classic work Tomer Devorah, which I know some people are studying with Rabbi Gadi in the morning after davening, and also he is buried in Sfat, and we just had an opportunity last week to go up to his grave in the holy cemetery there in Sfat. He explains, the Ramak, or Moshe Cordovero explains, what is the din kashya, din rafia? What is the strong judgment and the weak judgment? The strong judgment means that we are judged as individuals. Hashem is going to look at every single one of us, each and every one of us, and judge us on our merits, on our mitzvos, on our averos, on our transgressions, and he's going to judge us accordingly. And then there's a din rafia, an easier judgment, and that is based on the role that we play, the influence that we had, the impact that we're making on Am Yisrael, on the Jewish people. And Rav Dessler explains that's why there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, because on day one, we're being judged on our own merits, on our own transgressions. But on day two, we're being judged on the effect and impact that we have on the Jewish people and to what extent we are important or critical to the Jewish people, which means that theoretically, it's possible that on day one, Hashem could look at somebody and say, this guy, let's see, he spoke a lot of Lashon Hara, oy vey. He was not careful with what he ate. And look at his record for Shabbos or shul attendance or whatever. Not looking so good. And then moving into day two, you can say, oh my gosh, but look what he did for Am Yisrael. Look how he dedicated his time, his resources, and his talent, and his creativity to helping make the Jewish people stronger and helping other Jews and being part of the klal. Let him live. Okay, or as the saying goes, if the king needs the help or the services of the condemned man, then bring him back from the gallows. Okay, so if we are on day two, we are able to stand up to Hashem and say, yeah, maybe I spoke a little too much Lashon Hara, and maybe I wasn't so careful with what I ate or when I came to shul or what I did on Shabbos, but look what I did for Klal Yisrael. In such a case, we say that's going to be a positive judgment. Okay. The opposite is also true, by the way. Think about this. That on the first day, Hashem can say, let's look at this guy. Ooh, wow. Hot stuff. He's a tzaddik. He's a tzaddik. No Lashon Hara. Never spoke Lashon Hara the whole year. Ooh, he only ate Badatz, Mahadran, the best hekshers out there. He was very careful. Ooh, wow. Extremely careful with his Shabbos observance. Wow. This guy's looking good. And then on day 2, well, what did he do for Klal Yisrael? What did he do for the Jewish people? Where was his concern for Am Yisrael? He didn't dedicate any time or any of his resources or any of his energy or effort to helping the Jewish people. Hey, that's not so great. Okay, so that's what Rav Dessler says, why there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. And we see this in our Parsha, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. You are standing here today, Hayom, on Rosh Hashanah. You need to have the perspective of Kulchem. You are part of the Klal. You're part of Am Yisrael. You're committed. Okay, so on Rosh Hashanah, we want to commit. We want to find time to speak to Hashem and say, Hashem, this year I am committing. I'm committing to using my talents and my resources and my time to help the Jewish people who are suffering so much. I'm going to use my efforts and my energy to try to help the Jewish people and make myself more indispensable to my family, to my community, to my shul, to the Jewish people. Okay? And that's why we have day 1 and day 2. But just to take it a little step further, why this order? Why does it make sense to have day 1, a judgment on the individual, and day 2, a judgment on his role vis-a-vis the klal, the the nation? Well, that's for a simple reason. And that is, I've shared this with you before. There's a big dispute who said the following quote. If you Google this, it says either this was coined by William Shakespeare, or what I'm about to say was coined by Pablo Picasso. Now, I don't know how there can possibly be a dispute about whether Shakespeare or Picasso said something, but it doesn't matter who said it. I'll tell you what was said, and then I'll tell you a more interesting version of it that was definitely said by somebody more recently. So the quote from Picasso / Shakespeare is, and you've heard me say this before, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. Okay? But the better version of that quote comes from David Viscott, who I think I had never heard of, but people seem to have heard of. He was a radio personality. He was a psychologist in the 90s. He said, and he wrote in a book in 1993, he amended it a little bit. He said, the meaning of life is to discover your gift. And then he added an important line. The work in life, the hard work of life is to develop that gift. And then the meaning of life is to give that gift away to other people. So basically the idea here, and this is something, by the way, that Picasso didn't come up with, and David Viscott didn't come up with, and William Shakespeare didn't come up with this. You know who said this first? You know who came up with this? Hillel the elder. He said, what did Hillel the elder say? He said, Im ein ani li, mi li. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Which I understand to mean it's only me who can discover my greatness, my gift, my talent, my unique purpose, my unique mission, my own special contribution to make. Im ein ani li, if I'm not trying to figure that out and wondering what that is and developing it and working on it and expanding on it, then mili, who's going to do it for me? Nobody. But then Hillel says, ukisha ani la'atzmi ma'ani. But if I am only for myself, meaning if I never take it to the next step, if I never take that gift and work on it and develop it and then give it away to help other people, ma'ani, what am I? I'm nothing. I may as well never have lived on this earth. Because if God gave me a gift or a talent and I'm not using it to help other people and to make the world a better place, then I'm missing the whole purpose of life. So whether it was Picasso or Shakespeare or David Biscott or definitely Hillel, the point is that a person first has to work on what we call tikkun atzmi. He has to fix himself. She has to fix herself. That's the first stage. The first stage is taking responsibility for myself, my actions, my midot, my mitzvot, my perspectives, my outlook, my passion, my dreams, whatever it is, take responsibility for it myself, and then use it for tikkun haklal, for fixing and making the world a better place, for tikkun olam, for making the world a place more permeated with godliness in this world. So that's why day one, the judgment is on me. How am I doing? What am I developing myself? Am I working on things, or am I stagnating? And day two is, what role am I playing to participate in making a difference for the Jewish people? Now, I just want to spend 1 minute over here, because this is not the point, but we've discussed this before. But what are these three analogies? These three analogies, if the Mishnah is trying to teach us, or if the Talmud is trying to teach us, we're judged as individuals, just say it like that. Why do you have to give three analogies? Like sheep, like individuals climbing up a narrow mountain, up the steps of a narrow mountain, or like soldiers in David's army passing individually before David, the commander in chief. Why do we need to give three examples? So I heard this once from Rabbi Zev Leff, who lived in Jerusalem. He said, each one is telling you a different quality of the judgment. Sheep means God is just looking at me. Our meeting is going to end, by the way, in 10 minutes. In 9 minutes, I'm going to tell everybody to hang up and re-log back in, okay? So stay tuned for that. Sheep. Sheep means God looks at us as individuals. How is he doing? How is this sheep doing? Is the sheep healthy? Does the sheep bear the brand of the shepherd? As an individual, what is the spiritual status of this sheep on Rosh Hashanah? And then there's another component of the judgment, and that's the steps. What with steps and a narrow ladder or a narrow step passageway, you're either going up or down. Part of the judgment on Rosh Hashanah is we're being judged vis-a-vis ourselves. We're being judged vis-a-vis our past and our future. How are we doing? You can have two people on the same staircase. One of them is on the 73rd step, and one of them is on the 14th step. Who's doing better? Hard to know. You have to look at where he was a year ago. If the guy who's on the 73rd step was on the 73rd step last year, he's not doing so well. He's stagnating. And we know what we say about in Judaism, and from a Torah perspective, there's no stagnating. If you're not going up, you're going down. Life is a down escalator. If you're not climbing up, you're automatically going down. And then you have the guy on the 14th step. How's he doing? Well, where was he last year? Where was she last year? Oh, on the 7th step? Amazing. What incredible progress. So that's another way that Hashem looks at us on Rosh Hashanah, is not just as we are, but as we are versus how we have been and where we were a year ago. And finally, what's the analogy of the soldiers? Well, when you're in the army, I talk to my son a lot when he comes home, and he tells us all about his experience in the army. And there's so many different roles. Everybody plays a different role. You have combat soldiers, you have intelligence officers, you have tank drivers, you have artillery, you have medics, you have border guards, and even within those, combat, you have snipers, and you have people working communications and commanders. Everybody has their role. And what are you supposed to do in the army? You're just supposed to do your role and play your role. And if every soldier does what he or she is supposed to do and plays their role precisely the way are supposed to play it, then what's your tafkid? That's the word. What's your tafkid? What's your role? So that's also part of this judgment on Rosh Hashanah. Are you playing your role? Are you living up to your tafkid, your particular specific mission and charge as part of the army of the Jewish people? Are you a soldier for Hashem in this amazing, amazing battle of life? Okay, so that's what's going on over here. Now, Moshe's standing here on the last day of his life, and he is creating this covenant with the Jewish people. And there have been previous covenants, but there's something about this one that is inherently different. intrinsically different than all the other ones. And that is that this covenant contains a component of what we call in Hebrew aravut. Aravut means collective responsibility. Orev, and Orev is a cosigner, meaning on this moment, on this day, Moshe, not only the commentaries, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the sages explain, not only did Moshe make everybody commit to living up to their end of the covenant and their responsibility vis-a-vis this covenant with God, but they also were required to commit to being co-signers on the responsibility of every other single Jewish person that was alive at the time. Okay, this is the concept that we say, there's a song about it, and it's a very beautiful concept, called Yisrael Arevim Zebazeh, that every Jew is a guarantor or a co-signer. Every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. Now, this has many practical ramifications. I'll give you a practical example. Friday night, Kiddush. Okay, I'm making Kiddush. Now, usually the way this works in most homes is that one person makes Kiddush and has everybody else in mind, and everybody else answers Amen. And by doing so, everybody has fulfilled their responsibility to hear Kiddush. That's the typical way that it's done. I mean, not always, but often. How does that work? I'm the only one making Kiddush over here. How are you fulfilling your obligation to have Kiddush by me making it? So the answer is, I'm obligated in Kiddush. It's Friday night, it's Shabbat. I'm obligated to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. You're obligated to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. So you hear me say it, you answer Amen, and it's as if you said it. That's how the mechanics of, for example, Kiddush works. But what about a different scenario? What about a case where, let's say we have a bunch of guests. We invite a bunch of guests to the house, and as usually is the case, one guest or one family is late. You know, the soccer game went a little bit long, or the baseball game went into extra innings, or whatever it is, and there's one family that comes late. And you wait for a while because, you don't want to start without them, but eventually, everyone's hungry. Okay, we're going to start. When they show up, they'll join us. Now they show up an hour later, and they haven't heard Kiddush yet, right? But I already made Kiddush. So what do? Can I make Kiddush again for them? How can I do that? I've already fulfilled my obligation for Kiddush. So how can I make Kiddush now on behalf of you if I've already fulfilled my obligation to make Kiddush? The only way it works is because I have to make Kiddush and you have to make Kiddush. So I make it and you say, I made it, it's as if you made it. But if I already said Kiddush, then I've already discharged my responsibility to say Kiddush. How can I say it on your behalf? But the answer is you can. But how? I remember when we were in yeshiva at Eshet Torah, we were in the old city. And there were always lots of soldiers in the old city. And there were always people working security going down to the kotel. And our Rosh Yeshiva used to tell us after davening, don't come back to the yeshiva for the meal. The meal's not starting until you all go out with some wine or grape juice and go make Kiddush for the soldiers in the old city. Until they've heard Kiddush, don't come back, and we're not starting the meal. So that's what we used to do. We'd go around and we would say Kiddush for them and bring them some cookies and make Kiddush, whatever. How do you do that? How can I say Kiddush 5 times? So the answer to this question is, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'zeh. Every Jew is a cosigner or a guarantor on each other's mitzvos. And Rashi says that and explains that means that until you have fulfilled your mitzvah of Kiddush, I have not fulfilled my mitzvah of Kiddush. I said Kiddush, but I only, let's say, I fulfilled 90% of my mitzvah. But until every Jew around me that I could possibly make Kiddush for has heard Kiddush, I have not yet fulfilled my mitzvah of Kiddush. That is the concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'zeh, that every Jew is a guarantor on the mitzvos and the commitment of every other Jew to keeping Torah mitzvos. And that's this idea. That is what was added here on this last day of Moshe's life, when he once again reaffirmed the commitment and the covenant between God and the Jewish people. Okay, everybody, here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna stop the meeting, okay? And then everybody come right back on in about 15 seconds. Give me 15 seconds to restart the meeting and then come back on. And hopefully we'll get this problem worked out sooner or later. Okay, so don't just come right back.